our Game Development Assessment 1 presentation. So today we chose the game The Stanley Parable. And here is our team and roles. For our game artist, we have Tasnim, sound designer Josh, level designer as Clarence, game developer as Janelle, and producer as Princess. Now, we'll begin in this order, and I hope you enjoy our presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Tasneem and my role in this group is the game artist. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the game The Stanley Parable from a game artist perspective. The Stanley Parable is a first-person narrative game where you play as Stanley, an office worker who basically spends his days pressing keys on a computer. One day he notices his workplace being completely empty, so he goes up to look around. As you explore, a narrator starts explaining what you're supposed to do. And this is where the whole idea of choice comes in. From a game artist perspective, the main focus isn't action or complex mechanics. It's the illusion of choice. The story shifts depending on where the player goes, what decision they make, and the world and narration are designed to respond to that. The art and the storytelling work together to make every choice feel meaningful. The game mechanics. The game keeps things very simple. There are no enemies, puzzles, or big challenges. Instead, everything revolves around making choices and seeing how the narrator reacts. Even small decisions like which door you walk through can completely change the path you're on. The narrator comments on everything, whether you're following his instructions or going against them, which creates this fun back and forth between the player and the story. The environment also plays a big role. Hallways loop, rooms shift, and spaces become strange or unsettling depending on what you choose to do. The goal is to design environments that feel familiar at first, but then can transform in unexpected ways. So the player always feels like the world is reacting to them. Premises and design setup. Stanley works in a very standard, repetitive office, and that's intentional. The desk looks the same, the hallways look the same, and everything feels controlled and routine. Once the instructions on Stanley's screen stop, the empty office creates this airy liminal feeling. The world looks normal, but it feels just a little bit off, which matches the tone of the story. The narrator guides you, but he's not always reliable. Depending on what you choose to do, the environment changes, subtly at first, but more dramatically. From a game artist's perspective, the office functions like a stage that keeps rearranging itself based on the player's decisions. Color, lighting, and mood. Even though it's just an office setting, the color and lighting choice matters a lot. The design uses neutral colors and simple lighting to make the world feel controlled and ordinary, almost boring on purpose. This way, when something changes, players notice it instantly. If you go off the expected path, the mood shifts, darker lighting, stronger contrast, or weird unexpected spaces. The visual stays simple overall because the game wants players to focus on the narration and shifting choices. The minimalism makes every change stand out and adds to the storytelling. Level designing tools and artistic workflow. The game was built using Source Engine, and the levels were made in Valve's Hammer editor. Hammer has a modular block-based workflow, which naturally fits the office style the game uses. Artists blocked out the office layout in Hammer, place props, and set up the lighting. Any custom 3D models came from programs like Blender, Maya, or 3ds Max, and the textures created Textures were created in Photoshop before being added to the engine. Because of how Hammer works, the final look of the game ends up being clean, repetitive, and structured, which actually fits perfectly with the game's theme of routine and control. The tools help shape the world just as much as the narrative did. So that's a quick look at the game from a game artist's perspective.
So we have reached the next part of this presentation, which will be presented by me, Josh and Alvin Brock, taking the role of the sound designer of the Stanley Parable. Yeah, yes, the Stanley Parable. So before we begin, we'll show you the sound design team first. So credit to all of those people who made this, like the sound team by Robin Arnott and Eduardo Ortiz for all. The music though is added later in the 2030 games remake, which is Blake Robinson, Yanis Ioannidis, and Christian Baker. And the coolest part is the narrator, which is Kevin Brighting. We'll get more to this later. So so up so this is gonna be a short presentation, short section. So it's how it's behind the sound. So while the Stanley Parable's original mod, which is 2011, did had some generic sound effects as with every other game, since this is originally a Half-Life mod, by the way. It's a 2013 remake built on it with additional composers, which is Blake Robinson, Yanis Ioannidis, and Christian Baker. With the most significant one being Blake Robinson. Yeah, he made most of the tracks, by the way. But but if you have played this game before and you may have noticed that that one guy has been narrating the entire game throughout. So the significance of the narrator is that narrator speaks about the trajectory of the game and often breaks the fourth wall when the player breaks their choices. One of my favorite examples is how he calls the adventure line, which kicks in the following Stanley, which only makes it funnier. It's listen to this. It's so funny. Anyway, cut this out. Anyway. So how's the narrator selected? Read and use an audition process to search the right voice actor for the narrator. Which when one of the applicants, Kevin Brighting, submitted his shot, Reed really loved his voice so much he picked him on the first pass. Wow, what a Chad voice actor he did. Since then, Kevin Brighting also returned in the 2013 remake and the 2020 remake Ultra Deluxe. And finally, we'll find out about one of the really good composers out of all of them, which is Blake Robinson. So about the composer Blake Robinson. Blake Robinson is the real name of the Blake Robinson Synthetic Orchestra, which is a British video game music composer and narrator. And aside from works from the Stanley Parable, he is also known for his other musical works in games like Portal Knights and Lost in Random. So yeah, so that concludes that about the sound design section. It is a pretty small section, but it's just as important as well. Without it, the game would not be alive as well.
Hello, my name is Clarence and I will be explaining the level design behind the Stanley Parable. The Stanley Parable lead designers are Davey and William Putt. The game is well known for its non-linear level design in which players can choose their own path leading to different endings. Since the game is non-linear, the user is constantly given choices that branch into completely different rooms. Early at the start of the game, the user is given two options, two doors, a left and a right. If Stanley goes through the left door, he is able to reach the freedom ending by following the narrator's commands. If the player goes through the right door, they are able to reach an ending in which the narrator goes a bit crazy, with Stanley pressing buttons. Most of the Stanley Parable takes place inside an office building, although not the entire game is limited to that space, as the players make different choices that are able to reach completely new areas, such as a warehouse, and even other games like Minecraft and Portal. In an interview with William Putt, he mentioned that when designing the Stanley Parable, they tried to avoid making the player feel trapped, as if there was no options to choose from. They mainly focused on creating levels that let the player choices change the way they experience the game.
When designing the game, we tried to steer away as much as possible from saying, at this point, we want the player to feel like this. We felt like people got the strongest reactions when they were kind of feeling something, they were interpreting it as much as they could. Because if we went into a section saying, okay, we want to make the player feel trapped at this point and we want to make the player feel happy, then we were just setting ourselves up for failure. While if we kind of said there wasn't a wrong answer, that meant that we weren't invalidating anything the player felt, which I think was maybe part of the reason it's done so well.
This led to the success of the game, as it was unique to most games of its time. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Janelle. I will be discussing the game development standpoint of Stanley Parable. Here, the game programmer that helped program Stanley Parable is Jesus Higuera, otherwise known as Grand PC Online. He works with Galactic Cafe, Crows, and Everything Unlimited, with his first published game being The Stanley Parable in 2013. He also helped on other games like Beginner's Guide and, most recently, Stanley Parable Deluxe Edition. So, alright. When programming a game, you must understand what the main game is going to be about so you can design around it. The creator, Davey Ridden, had the idea on what would happen if you could disobey the narrator. So Davey started designing the mechanics and structure around that idea, having its core mechanics be about perception and limitation of freedom in video games. The core mechanics. So, since Stanley Parable is a first-person video game where you control a character named Stanley, its core gameplay mechanics are quite simple, and there wasn't a need to script it to have a third-person camera. The first mechanic is player movement, so you can move your camera using your mouse and move using your keyboard and observe the environment around you. The other main mechanic are interactive objects around the map so players can click or press something to trigger events. Both of these mechanics are needed for an interactive non-linear story game. Next, we have the game content. Here we have the narrator that is the voice that is constantly heard by the player in Stanley Parable. His motives and roles varies per ending. The narrator is voiced by Kevin Brighting, a really good being, and so the role of the narrator guides the player by narrating the story and what is going to happen, which gives the player an idea on what to do. What the player does, though, depends on whether or not they would listen to the narrator, and thus going through the branching paths and the endings obtained based on player choices. Of course, that doesn't stop the narrator from commenting on every act of defiance the player makes. He has a lot of voice lines recorded and implemented into the game, flawlessly playing one after another in a sequential order depending on the path the player made in the story. Some voice lines play if you interact with something, and some voice lines play if you, well, do nothing. It's really cool. Okay, so here is the structure. The structure of the game is built upon its several different endings that players can experience based on the choices they made during the whole game. There's about 19 different endings that players can get in the game, all obtainable based on the choices they make. All these endings have different requirements to be obtained. For example, you can't get this ending if you didn't listen to the narrator, or you can't get to this ending because you haven't gone to this direction. All the paths the player take doesn't go to one definitive ending. It all leads to a different ending no matter what. As you can see in the flowchart over here, we have choices that branch out and lead into different endings. This is the whole structure of the game. All the choices, all the endings in one flowchart. And I suppose that concludes my section of the PowerPoint. Now I'm going to pass this to the person reviewing this in a producer's standpoint.
Hi everyone, my name is Princess, and I'll be continuing the review of Stanley Parable as a producer. Now that I have to look at the game as one, I don't just judge how fun it is, I also look at how smart its developmental strategy was. Now, the Stanley Parable is a perfect example of a successful independent project, showing how a great idea, smart budget choices, and creative marketing can lead to huge success. Now, onto the first slide, we have the very beginning. So, where did Stanley Parable first appear? Yes, it first appeared as a modification or a mod in Half-Life 2. That was all the way back in 2011. It was created by one person, Davey Ridden. So what exactly is a modification? Well, it's separate. It's not necessarily separate from the main game that is Half-Life 2. It's just an add-on the player can download, created by different developer, that lets them experience the game in a different way. So the modification of Stanley Parable and Half-Life basically had the same concept. It had a narrator, it had the choices, it had endings, but it wasn't as full-fledged as the standalone game. Now, when they made the standalone version, it was a huge change, a complete overhaul, with new areas, more than 10 new endings, and of course, new graphics. What did not change is the fact that they used the same source engine as the original game, Half-Life 2. And significantly, even though they did work with it to create the mod, he had no prior professional experience with Source, but he taught himself using free online resources like, say, Google community hubs, forums, and stuff like that. Now, this DIY approach kept the initial costs extremely low because of course, you didn't need to take any courses or stuff like that, because most things they're already available online. And then next slide we have the development itself. So the standalone version was a collaboration. It was the between the original creator, of course, Davey Ridden, and William Pugh, operating as the Studio Galactic Cafe. So they had a small team, and it guaranteed a strong focus and a clear vision, which is exactly what a narrative-driven game like this needs. Because, of course, the concept for Stanley Parable itself is already as unique as it is, and they didn't want to overcomplicate it. They wanted to make sure it stuck to the very main idea. So their success wasn't due to having hundreds of employees working for it. It was built on two creators who fully understood their goal, their passion. This tight structure made sure that every new feature, every design choice supported the game's core theme about choice and the player's relationship with the narrative. Next slide, we have the scheduling of how long the game was made when it was released. Now, in terms of schedule, the team worked on the standalone game for about 2 years before the October 2013 release. As a producer, I appreciate their discipline because Ridden made the strategic choice to keep the game explicitly short. So the game itself, it doesn't take that long for you to finish and reach until one ending. Why? Because there's a bajillion endings in Stanley Parable, and if it takes too long to finish one, the player wouldn't be able to go through all the endings because either it would take way too long or they would just get impatient and drop the game itself. That goes against their whole goal of making the player experience a lot of things. This decision wasn't about cutting corners, but I will explain why. So, keeping the scope small is often the key to success for an independent game like this. Next, we have, yes, the marketing. So, in my opinion, the marketing either makes or breaks the game. You can have a good game, but horrible marketing, it's not going to reach that much people. So, the marketing phase is where they really excelled. So, because they dedicated an extra 2 months of work, a large investment of time, only to create the marketing materials and a unique demonstration. So, it wasn't any half-baked marketing, they actually put their time and effort into it. Their focus was not on making marketing materials that simply told people to buy the game. Instead, they wanted to create content that was fun for people to experience. So the marketing itself was an experience. It actually was enjoyable for the players, for the users. So, like, quote, fun for people to experience and to be a part of, with basically quote, 0% of the design aimed at trying to get the game to sell. They didn't want to sell the game, they wanted to attract the players because, hey, this game is pretty fun, you should try this. They treated the demo like a second, small game development project. Next, we have the marketing. Now, this different approach worked incredibly well. The demo itself, that took 2 months to make, the unique self-contained demos were downloaded and played by an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 people before the official launch. Yes, that's a lot of people for the demo itself. Now, this extra content created huge media buzz. The team called it the equivalent of, I quote, 2 video game launches. That's how successful their marketing was. So most of the marketing was word of mouth, like including major content creators like yes, PewDiePie, as you can see here on the picture itself. He is and used to be one of the biggest YouTubers at that time. And he made a game review, so obviously it would reach a lot of people. And this word of mouth was all driven by the unique demo, essentially doubled the game's visibility for zero advertising costs. Because the concept of Stanley Parable, yes, it's unique. So of course, obviously, it would make great content for YouTube videos. So the YouTubers saw that, they decided, hey, why not make a video about this? I'm sure it would get a lot of views. And when it did get a lot of views, Stanley Parable itself also gained benefit from it. So in conclusion, Stanley Parable stands out as a brilliant example of concept-driven development. The team made every single element, the game's scope, the content, and even the marketing work together as a unified, self-aware experience. They successfully used the unique idea of the game to comment on the relationship between the player and the creators. So by turning their marketing into genuinely entertaining content, instead of trying to hard sell the game itself to its players, they actually made something entertaining and something enjoyable, resulting in over 100,000 units sold within just days of launch, all achieved through a hands-on, low-budget approach. They also made a deluxe version, so if you made a sequel for something, I think that should show how successful something is. But that's all for me as a producer, and thank you so much for listening. For paying attention to our presentation. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from our game review of the Stanley Parable. Next up, we have at the very end our references used. Thank you.